Good morning. We live in a world that rewards volume. The loudest voice often gets the most attention. The one who posts the most, shouts the most, and claims the most tends to be noticed first. But let me ask you something. Does being noticed mean being valuable? Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I met a young man at a leadership retreat. He was quiet, observant. While others competed to be heard, he listened. When he finally spoke on the third day, the entire room fell silent. Not because he raised his voice, but because in 3 days he'd said nothing, and in that silence he'd earned everyone's attention. And what he said was simple but powerful, something along the lines of, "I've just been listening, and it seems like we all want the same thing, we just say it differently." That was it, but it shifted the energy in the room. Why? Because it came from reflection, not reaction. Silence is not the absence of something. It's the presence of everything. Silence is where we understand. It's where we notice things others miss. It's where the real answers leave the ones that can't be Googled. The problem is, most of us are uncomfortable with silence. We rush to fill it. We interrupt, we assume, we react. But silence, that takes patience, and patience takes courage. We've been conditioned to believe that success comes from hustle, noise, constant motion. But nature doesn't work like that. A tree doesn't force itself to grow. The ocean doesn't fight for attention. They just are, and in simply being, they become. Now, I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying trust the process. Because when we stay silent, really silent, we learn. We become more aware of our values. Our intuition sharpens. Our direction becomes clear. The answers start to show up, not all at once, but steadily, naturally. Think about it, the best leaders don't speak to impress. They speak to express, and they listen to understand, not to reply. If you want to build something that lasts, whether it's a relationship, a business, a movement, learn to sit with the silent. To trust that you don't always need to control the pace. Let go of the need to prove. You don't need to shout your worth. You need to live it, so stay silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're preparing to say something that matters. And when the time comes, speak with clarity, speak with purpose, but until then, let everything come naturally. Silence builds presence and earns trust. This idea may seem counterintuitive in a world where visibility is often confused with value. But it holds a profound truth that transcends trends, industries, and even personalities. In the age of social media, constant communication, and 24/7 connectivity, silence is not only rare, it's powerful. It's misunderstood, overlooked, and frequently undervalued. Yet those who understand its weight, who learn to harness it, become people others naturally gravitate toward. Think about the people you trust the most. They're likely not the ones who always dominate the conversation or those who fill every gap in dialogue with noise. Instead, they're the ones who make you feel heard. They take a breath before they speak. They don't just respond, they absorb. There's a difference between being present in the room and bringing presence into the room. Silence is the difference maker. It gives space for observation, for intention, and most importantly, for others. When someone walks into a meeting and immediately starts asserting their opinions, they may appear confident. But when someone enters a room, says very little, listens with full attention, and later offers a thoughtful insight, the group leans in. Their words carry more weight, not because they spoke louder or more often, but because they allowed their silence to build a presence before they ever opened their mouth. They didn't demand attention. They earned it. Presence is not about charisma in the conventional sense. It's not about being the loudest or the most animated. True presence comes from congruence, when your inner stillness aligns with your outer expression. Silence allows that congruence to develop. It creates a space where clarity can rise, where alignment can happen, and where authenticity shows up. People sense that. We're wired to pick up on sincerity, even when it's nonverbal. In fact, often, especially when it's nonverbal, silence is not passive, it's active. When someone is silent and present, they're not disengaged. They are reading the room. They are noticing tone, body language, energy shifts. They're asking questions silently. What's not being said? What are people reacting to? What are they avoiding? This kind of attention is rare, and in its rarity, it becomes incredibly valuable. When people feel truly seen and heard, they begin to trust. And trust isn't given to the one who talks the most. It's given to the one who listens best. There's a saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Silence, when used intentionally, is a powerful way to show care. It demonstrates that you're not trying to rush someone to a conclusion or push your agenda. You're simply holding space, and when someone feels that space being held for them, without judgment, without pressure, their guard lowers. That's where connection begins. That's where trust starts to grow. Consider how this applies in leadership. A leader who speaks constantly, who answers every question before it's finished, who fills every pause, may project authority, but often erodes confidence. People begin to feel like their input doesn't matter, but a leader who stays silent for a few moments after a question is asked, who resists the urge to immediately give direction, who instead invites others to contribute. This is the leader who cultivates ownership in a team. Their silence is not indifference. It's a signal that others' voices matter. This principle also plays out in conflict. In moments of tension, our instinct is often to defend, to explain, to fill the space with our side of the story. But silence in the face of conflict, especially when emotions are high, can be the most disarming response. Not a cold, punishing silence, but a thoughtful, grounded one. A silence that says, I'm here, I'm listening. I'm not going to escalate this. Let's move toward understanding. In that space, resolution becomes possible, and in that possibility, trust is rebuilt. Silence also earns trust with ourselves. In silence, we come back to center. We remember who we are, what we believe, and what truly matters. Noise confuses. Silence clarifies. When we allow ourselves to regularly be quiet, really quiet, we tune into that internal compass that always points true north. That's not just helpful for decision making. It's essential, because when we're disconnected from ourselves, we seek validation externally. We talk more, we explain more, we try to impress. But when we're grounded in our own self-awareness, we don't need to perform. We just need to be. That kind of presence radiates trust without saying a word. There's a discipline to silence. It's not easy, especially in environments where being on all the time is normalized, or where we fear that being silent will make us seem weak, uninformed, or disengaged. But silence isn't about knowing less. It's about knowing when not to speak. That takes far more wisdom than constantly having something to say. It requires self-restraint, empathy, and a long-term mindset. It means giving up the short-term satisfaction of being heard in exchange for the deeper satisfaction of being respected. The irony is that when we practice silence, we often end up being heard more. People begin to notice our presence. They recognize our thoughtfulness. They learn that when we speak, it matters. Silence builds a reputation over time. It's a kind of credibility that doesn't show up on resumes, but defines the people others turn to when it really counts. It's what makes someone a trusted advisor instead of just a colleague, a mentor instead of just a manager, a friend instead of just an acquaintance. Silence also enhances clarity in communication. When we pause before speaking, we create room for our thoughts to settle. That pause is where raw reactions transform into intentional responses. We're less likely to say something we regret. We're more likely to speak with precision. And the more precise we are, the more people understand us. Miscommunication diminishes, respect increases, trust again grows, and perhaps most importantly, silence invites others into the conversation. When we stop filling every gap with our own voice, others feel safer to use theirs. That's especially crucial in diverse teams, where power dynamics or cultural norms may discourage certain people from speaking up. When we lead with silence, We create room for everyone at the table. We shift the focus from dominance to collaboration. We move from "look at me" to "let's build something together." In that shift, trust is not just built, it is multiplied. Listening reveals deeper understanding. This simple truth is one of the most overlooked principles in communication, leadership, and human connection. Most people believe they are good listeners, but what they are really doing is waiting for their turn to speak. They're formulating replies in their minds while the other person is still talking. They're analyzing, reacting, judging, but listening, true listening, is something different. It is not a passive act. It is active, deliberate, and often uncomfortable. It requires the listener to step outside of their own mental framework and fully enter someone else's. We live in a time when information is everywhere, yet real understanding feels rare. People are quick to speak, to post, to offer opinions, but slow to listen with curiosity and humility. When we truly listen, we slow everything down. We don't rush toward judgment. We don't fill in the blank. We allow silence to exist without anxiety. In that silence, something powerful begins to emerge. The speaker feels seen, and the listener begins to perceive more than just words. Words are only one part of what people communicate. Beneath the words, there are emotions, beliefs, fears, and intentions. Most of us have learned to listen to the surface. We hear the what, but deeper listening reveals the why. It allows us to understand motivation, pain, passion, and purpose. And once we understand someone's why, we see them not just as a voice or a problem to solve, but as a person. This shift, this movement from hearing content to understanding context, is where deeper connection happens. Listening also helps us recognize what's not being said. The pauses, the hesitations, the shifts in tone, these are all forms of communication. Someone might say, "I'm fine," but their voice trembles slightly. Their eyes don't meet yours, their shoulders are slumped. A shallow listener hears the words and moves on. A deeper listener notices the misalignment and gently asks the next question, not out of suspicion, but out of care. That's how trust is built, and trust, once built, opens the door to insight. When people feel heard, they open up, they share more. They move past the rehearsed responses and start revealing their truth. And when that happens, the quality of information changes. It becomes more honest, more vulnerable, more meaningful. This kind of listening doesn't just benefit the person speaking. It gives the listener access to richer, more accurate data. Whether you're leading a team, supporting a friend, or negotiating a partnership, the one who listens better always has the advantage. Not to manipulate, but to connect and act wisely. Listening deeply also expands our own understanding of the world. Every person we meet knows something we don't. They've lived a different life, faced different challenges, and drawn different conclusions. When we stop assuming we already know and begin listening with genuine curiosity, we encounter perspectives that challenge and enrich our own. This kind of listening requires us to temporarily suspend our ego. It means accepting that we might have something to learn, not just facts, but wisdom. In conversations, especially difficult ones, listening becomes a bridge over conflict. When tensions rise, people naturally move into defensive modes. They try to protect their identity, their point of view, their position. But when one person in the room chooses to truly listen, without interrupting, without preparing their counterargument, the energy shifts. The other person feels less threatened. Walls start to come down. It doesn't mean agreement is automatic, but it does mean that both parties can engage with less resistance and more respect. And that's the beginning of resolution. In leadership, the skill of listening is one of the most underestimated and underutilized tools. Great leaders don't just direct, they listen. They create environments where team members feel safe to speak honestly. They don't just gather feedback, they listen to it, reflect on it, and act on it. When employees feel like their voices matter, they become more engaged, more loyal, and more innovative. They stop checking boxes and start contributing ideas. Listening in this way becomes a force multiplier for creativity and culture. Listening also plays a crucial role in learning. We cannot learn what we already think we know. When we listen with the intent to understand rather than the intent to respond, we open ourselves up to new insights. We begin to hear patterns, to connect dots, to recognize gaps in our thinking. We don't just collect information, we begin to process it on a deeper level. Listening becomes a method of discovery, not only of others, but of ourselves. In relationships, personal and professional, listening communicates love, respect, and presence. When someone shares their story and we give them our full attention, we're telling them, you matter. Your experience matters. We're not trying to fix them or impress them or compete with them. We're simply holding space. That act alone can be transformational. Many people are walking through life feeling invisible. When you listen to someone with presence, you make them feel real again. And that's a gift most people don't even know how to ask for. It's also important to recognize that listening is not the same as agreeing. You can listen deeply to someone you disagree with. In fact, that's where the most growth occurs. When we resist the urge to argue or correct, and instead seek to understand how a rational person could arrive at a different conclusion, we expand our empathy. We start to realize that behind every opinion is a story. And behind every story is a human being doing the best they can with what they know. This understanding doesn't weaken our convictions. It grounds them in compassion. The discipline of listening also enhances decision making. Leaders who listen to a wide range of voices before making a decision often make better choices. They consider more angles, identify more risks, and uncover more opportunities. They avoid the echo chamber of hearing only what they want to hear. They allow dissenting views to be expressed, and because of that, their teams trust them more. Not because they always agree with every suggestion, but because people know they were truly heard. Listening, at its best, is a posture of humility. It says, I don't have all the answers, I might be missing something, help me understand. That posture is rare, but it is also magnetic. People want to be around those who listen, not just to respond, but to understand. Because understanding is the beginning of every meaningful connection, and connection, in any human endeavor, is where the real power lies. We often think of communication as what we say, but the quality of our communication is determined just as much, if not more, by how well we listen. When we become known as someone who listens deeply, people start coming to us not just with words, but with trust. They confide in us, collaborate with us, and follow us, not because we're the loudest, but because we made them feel heard. Patience invites natural clarity. In a world driven by speed, immediacy, and the demand for instant results, patience often seems like a weakness or a luxury. But in reality, patience is a profound strength. It is not simply waiting. It is the discipline of waiting well. It's the ability to remain calm and grounded even when the outcome isn't yet visible. Patience is the space between action and outcome, and in that space, clarity is born. When we act too quickly, we often act from emotion, impulse, or incomplete information. We move based on assumptions rather than insight. We react rather than respond. But when we cultivate patience, we allow space for our thoughts to settle and our perceptions to sharpen. Just as muddy water clears when left undisturbed, our inner world becomes clearer when we stop stirring it constantly. Through patience, what once seemed chaotic begins to organize itself naturally. Patterns become visible. Priorities come into focus. Decisions that once felt overwhelming begin to feel obvious. Clarity isn't something we chase. It's something we allow, and it rarely arrives in a rush. It needs time to form. It needs silence. It needs space. Patience creates that space. It gives us permission to not force an answer, to not push for a solution before it's ready. The most meaningful insights often don't appear when we're frantically looking for them. They arise when we've done our part, stepped back, and allowed things to unfold. There is a rhythm to life and to every process in it. Nature models this for us constantly. Seeds don't sprout the moment they're planted. They germinate in darkness unseen. Trees grow slowly, season by season, not by force but by flow. Even the tides follow a rhythm. Ebb and flow, rise and retreat. Yet as humans, we often try to break this rhythm. We rush growth, we demand results, we see stillness as stagnation. But growth that is rushed is rarely rooted. Without patience, we risk building on unstable ground, pursuing clarity without understanding, moving forward without truly knowing where we're headed. Patience is not inactivity, it's a very active form of trust. It's trusting the process even when it's not producing visible results. It's trusting ourselves that we are capable of handling uncertainty without needing to control it. And it's trusting life, that it unfolds in its own time, not ours. This kind of trust doesn't come easily, especially when there is pressure to perform or prove. But it is in these moments, when we choose patience over panic, that we demonstrate our deepest strength. Clarity gained through patience is more than intellectual understanding. It's a felt sense, it comes with alignment, it resonates not only in the mind but in the body. You don't just think something is right, you feel that it is. And that feeling often emerges only after you've allowed all the noise to quiet down, when you've stopped trying to control the outcome and started paying attention to what's actually happening. It's in this kind of presence that real clarity arises. In relationships, patience allows us to see people as they are, not as we wish them to be. It helps us move beyond surface judgments and into deeper understanding. When we are patient with others, we give them the space to be fully themselves. We stop projecting our timeline onto them. We learn to listen more, assume less, and connect more authentically. Patience turns interaction into connection. It allows trust to build slowly, the way it's meant to. In work, patience helps us avoid the trap of busy work disguised as progress. It encourages thoughtful strategy over reactive activity. It teaches us that momentum is not the same as movement. Just because we're moving doesn't mean we're moving in the right direction. Patience allows us to pause, recalibrate, and make sure we're aligned with the long-term vision rather than the short-term pressure. It reminds us that quality takes time, that mastery is not a product of speed, but of steady and consistent practice. Creativity also flourishes with patience. The best ideas rarely come in the first 5 minutes. They require incubation. They need mental space, emotional openness, and the absence of pressure. When we are patient with the process of creation, we allow ourselves to explore without judgment. We're not rushing toward a finished product. We're exploring what wants to emerge. This kind of patience is what separates quick output from meaningful work. It's what turns ideas into art, in decision making. Patience is the difference between reacting and responding. A rushed decision may satisfy the moment, but a patient decision serves the future. It's not about delaying action endlessly. It's about waiting until the fog clears, until you can see far enough ahead to move with confidence. Sometimes that clarity comes quickly. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, or even longer. But when you wait for it, the actions you take afterward are more grounded, more aligned, and more effective. Patience also nurtures resilience. When we learn to wait without frustration, we build emotional endurance. We become less thrown off by delays, setbacks, or slow progress. We stop measuring our value by how quickly things happen. Instead, we start measuring our strength by how we stay steady when they don't. This shift changes everything. We stop chasing clarity like it's a finish line and start engaging with it like it's a lifelong process. Because it is. Practicing patience requires us to relinquish control, not of our actions, but of the outcome. We still plan, still work, still show up fully, but we release the need to see immediate returns. This is not resignation, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that not all progress is visible and not all clarity is immediate. Often, the most important shifts are happening beneath the surface, in ways we can't yet perceive. This kind of patience cultivates humility. It reminds us that we are not the center of every process. That time is not something we command, but something we move within. And in moving within it consciously, we start to notice things we never saw before. Subtle signals, gentle nudges, intuitive knowing, all of which were drowned out by the noise of urgency. Clarity that comes through patience is sustainable. It doesn't come from external validation or fleeting motivation. It comes from alignment with truth, your truth, the situation's truth, the reality you're navigating. It's not a flash of insight that fades by morning. It's a steady knowing that builds over time, one that doesn't need to be forced because it's rooted in trust, awareness, and deep observation. Patience helps us learn the difference between what is urgent and what is important. It keeps us from confusing movement with meaning. It gives us the space to ask better questions, to listen to quieter voices, to reconsider what truly matters. Through patience, we become less reactive, more responsive, less anxious, more grounded, and in that state, clarity doesn't need to be chased. It begins to show up on its own, uninvited, but always welcome. Stillness is where your intuition speaks. In a world that constantly pushes us toward activity, movement, noise, and distraction, stillness often feels counterintuitive. It is mistaken for laziness or idleness, something reserved only for the moments between real work. But stillness is not an absence of action. It is a space of awareness. It is in stillness that we come back to ourselves, and in that return, we begin to hear a voice that is often drowned out by the volume of daily life, the voice of intuition. Intuition doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for attention. It whispers. And in order to hear it, we need to quiet everything else. We need to step out of the flood of thoughts, opinions, notifications, and demands that pull us away from the present moment. Stillness is the gateway to that present moment. It's what allows us to strip away the noise and begin to listen from the inside out rather than the outside in. Most people make decisions by gathering external input, advice, data, trends, analysis. These are all valuable, but without the ability to discern what aligns internally, they can lead us astray. Intuition is the internal compass that helps us navigate complexity when logic alone isn't enough. It connects our lived experience, our unconscious knowledge, and our emotional intelligence into a deep, immediate knowing. But it requires stillness to access. We cannot intuit clearly when we are anxious, scattered, or performing for approval. Stillness is not something that happens by accident. It's something we create. It can happen in meditation, but also in the quiet walks, the pauses before responding, the minutes spent staring out a window without needing to do anything. Stillness is what we find when we stop trying to manufacture clarity and allow it to emerge. It is not about emptying the mind completely. It's about creating the space for our deeper intelligence to come forward. The mind loves patterns. It wants structure and predictability, but intuition often comes from a different place. It's nonlinear. It can appear suddenly as a gut feeling or a quiet conviction that defies logical explanation. This is why many people distrust it. They've been conditioned to value only what can be explained, measured, or proven. But the most meaningful insights, the ones that shift the course of our lives, rarely arrive in spreadsheets. They appear in moments of stillness, when we're not trying to figure it all out, but simply allowing ourselves to be. When we cultivate stillness, we begin to recognize the difference between fear and intuition. Fear tends to be loud, insistent, urgent. It speaks in the language of avoidance and protection. Intuition, by contrast, is calm. It doesn't rush us. It doesn't scream for our attention. It simply offers a direction, a nudge, a pull, a knowing. And once we've felt it, even once, we start to understand its tone. We learn to trust that subtle inner voice even when we can't justify it to others. Stillness also allows us to feel the truth of our experiences. When we're constantly in motion, we often suppress or bypass our emotions. We stay busy to avoid discomfort, but emotions, especially the ones we don't want to feel, carry important information. They are messengers, not obstacles. In stillness, we give them room to speak, and through that honest feeling, clarity begins to rise. We understand what's truly bothering us, what we're yearning for, what needs to change. Intuition speaks through the body, and the body speaks most clearly in stillness. There's a certain wisdom that builds over time when we spend regular time in silence. We begin to see our patterns more clearly. We recognize when we're acting from old stories, from conditioned fears, from inherited expectation. In that recognition, we create choice, and with choice comes freedom. Stillness doesn't just connect us to intuition. It connects us to our own agency. It reminds us that we are not just reacting to life, but actively shaping it, even when we do so quietly. The most centered leaders, artists, teachers, and creators all share one thing in common. They make space for stillness, not just because it recharges them, but because it reconnects them to purpose, to vision, to self. Stillness is not a break from doing. It is the source of right action. It allows action to arise from alignment rather than agitation. Decisions made from this place tend to be more sustainable, more authentic, and more deeply rooted in integrity. Stillness is also a form of presence. When we are still, we become more aware of what is happening right now, without the filter of past wounds or future worries. This presence sharpens our perception. We begin to notice things we missed before, the subtle cues in a conversation, the synchronicities in daily life, the ideas that arise seemingly from nowhere. These are not accidents. They are part of the intelligence that surrounds us, waiting for us to slow down enough to notice. In moments of stillness, we often experience what can only be described as alignment. It's the sensation of everything clicking into place, even if we don't yet know how it will unfold. This feeling doesn't come from planning or pushing. It comes from listening. And once we've touched that alignment, we stop needing to force things. We begin to trust that life is not something we have to dominate or control, but something we can partner with. Stillness also deepens our relationships. When we show up with presence, without the constant need to fill the silence or prove our point, we create space for others to be seen. We listen better, we feel more, we become less reactive and more responsive. This kind of presence is rare, and people feel it immediately. It creates connection without effort. Intuition is not only a solitary guide, it's a relational tool. It helps us sense when something is off in a conversation, when a team is misaligned, when a friend is withholding something they don't yet know how to say. These things can't be captured in data, but they can be felt in stillness. It's important to understand that stillness isn't about withdrawal or detachment. It's about returning to the core. From that grounded place, we can engage with life more fully, not less. We're not checking out, we're checking in. And from that check-in, we become more intentional, more discerning, more intuitive. We begin to operate not from the surface, but from depth. We don't need to retreat to a monastery or abandon our daily lives to experience stillness. It can happen anywhere. A moment of breath before entering a meeting, a pause in the middle of conflict, a quiet walk without a phone. These moments may seem small, but they accumulate. Over time, they create an inner environment that is less reactive and more receptive. And in that environment, intuition thrives. In stillness, we also begin to separate the signal from the noise. The world offers us constant input opinions, fears, expectations, demands. Stillness helps us hear the signal beneath it all, our own inner wisdom. That wisdom may not always offer easy answers, but it offers true ones. And the more we practice returning to that space, the more fluent we become in our own intuitive language. There will always be reasons to keep moving. Deadlines, pressure, restlessness, But the greatest clarity often arrives not when we're running, but when we pause, when we let the noise settle, when we allow ourselves to be still enough to remember what we already know. Intuition doesn't need to be created. It needs to be heard, and stillness is where that hearing begins.